Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the 4th annual Anthony Mascioli Rainbow Dialogues. My name is Brandon Fess, and on behalf of the Local History and Genealogy Division of the Rochester Public Library, the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library, and the Out Alliance, welcome. Our first speaker today is Richard Serkis, appropriately on behalf of the estate of Anthony Mascioli.
Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to give you a brief background about Anthony Mascioli. He was born December 13th, 1930, by parents who immigrated here from Italy. His passion for the arts, for music, and also for the gay community, especially in Rochester, New York, was very strong. In the 50s, this young man, Anthony Mascioli, came out to himself. And as you know, at that time, it was very difficult for a man his age, in his early teens, to do so. His family was poor. He grew up on North Street in the city of Rochester. Because of his strict father, who did not accept him as being a gay man, he ran off to New York City, where he lived in subway stations and struggled to become a person with respect, which was very difficult. Luckily, he had good friends here in Rochester that brought him back. He ended up going to the University of Rockford, where he studied theater, language, and was very excited about seeing his talents. He moved back to New York City in his late 20s, where he became very successful in multi-businesses. Even though he never returned to Rochester, his heart was always here because it was a great foundation for him to become who he became, successful and a very happy man. Upon his death, in my friendship with him over 40 years, I was very, very happy to see that he left his fortune to this area. The gay community has prospered from his donations over the years, and I am so glad we are all here to honor him. And this programming is because of his gifts. Thank you, and enjoy this wonderful program that we're going to have today.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Luis Burgos. I'm president of the board of directors of the Out Alliance. The Out Alliance is extremely proud to have supported the Rainbow Dialogues from its inception, and we thank you for joining us today. We hope that you also will take time to visit the Out Alliance website to stay in tune with our activities and developments, and that's at outalliance.org. So I would like to acknowledge the Rochester Public Library and the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library for their support and partnership with the Rainbow Dialogues since its inception. Now I'd like to introduce Christine Radarski of the Rochester Public Library. She's the Rochester State historian and a historical services consultant.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us here today. I'm delighted to see so many of you join us for our 4th annual Rainbow Dialogues. And thank you to the Out Alliance for the continuing collaboration in producing the Rainbow Dialogues. Of course, the Rochester Public Library, which I represent, and the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library, which has supported the Rainbow Dialogue since its inception in 2018. I also would like to acknowledge Evelyn Bailey, who cannot be with us today, but who is the founder and the leader of the Rainbow Dialogues project. It was her vision that started this project 4 years ago now. And so, Evelyn, I know you're not with us today, but you're in our thoughts and prayers, and we look forward to seeing you join us here again soon. This year's Rainbow Dialogues focuses on intersectionality and addressing inequality in the Rochester community. And we have a number of people joining us today who have graciously given their time to provide their individual reflections as a lens to focus on communal issues in the community. all of the people who will speak today have led or experienced community responses to injustice. We're delighted to have Wiliam Johnson, who has been a leader in the Rochester community for decades, first as president of the Urban League, and then as mayor of the city of Rochester. And now he serves as co-chair of the Rochester-Monroe County Commission on Racial and Structural Equity. Mayor Johnson will be our keynote speaker. And then we have several wonderful panelists who will join us for our next panel session. Robert Day, who has lived experience in Rochester's gay community from the 1950s to the present. Angela Perez Delgado, community organizer and president and CEO of the Ibero-American Action League. Barb Turner, who's a community leader, especially in the areas of public health, through her work at the MOCA Center, the Anthony Jordan Health Center, and as a member of the Rochester Area Task Force on AIDS. So we look forward to hearing what all of you have to say and to share with us as a community. And also we encourage the audience members to participate in the dialogue today by entering your comments and your questions into the chat, and we will be monitoring those for our discussion as the morning proceeds. Next, it is my honor to introduce someone that I think many of you know, Gerry Szymanski. Gerry is a Rochester resident. He serves as the Out Alliance librarian. He's also employed as the Reserves and Digital Services librarian at the Ciblic Music Library of the Eastman School of Music. He's been a member of the Rainbow Dialogues Committee since its inception in 2017. And many of you also know him as a noted photographer and filmmaker with numerous commercial, individual, and artistic clients in the Rochester area. And those of us who are historians also know and respect Gerry for his lecturing on the arts and on the Swedish Nightingale, Jenny Lind. So Gerry, thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Christine, and that's Jenny watching over me behind my shoulder. Everyone, the phrase speaking truth to power has been tossed around a lot recently, but our keynote speaker has been doing so during his entire professional career. As CEO of the Rochester Urban League for 20 years and mayor of Rochester for 9 years, Bill Johnson was not afraid to confront issues of racism, social justice, and sexual oppression. He knew firsthand the lessons learned from an unequal world and worked hard, first at a nonprofit and then at a city government, to make positive change. Since leaving office, Mayor Johnson has been a distinguished professor of public policy and urban studies at R&T and a frequent guest on WXXI Radio's Connections with Evan Dawson. And most recently, as Christine mentioned, he's been appointed one of 3 co-chairs of a commission co-sponsored by the City of Rochester and Monroe County, the Commission on Racial and Structural Equality, or RASE. As you can imagine, their work has gotten much busier over these last few weeks, and so we appreciate that his honor has been able to take time to be with us this morning. On behalf of the Rainbow Dialogues and all of our institutional and community partners, I am privileged to introduce to you the 64th Mayor of the City of Rochester, New York, the Honorable Wiliam A. Johnson, Jr.
Thank you. Make sure I'm not muted. Thank you very much, Gerry, Christine, and to all of you, Richard. It's good to see and be back in dialogue with you. Gerry, I have to make one quick correction. I've been trying to be mayor for 9 years, because if I had lopped off those last 4, there may not have been a fast ferry, and I would, my life would have been immensely improved. But no, it was 12 years. Unfortunately, I got to live up to those last 4 years that I was mayor.
I'm sorry about that.
But no. I want to also send my best wishes to Evelyn Bailey. I'm so sorry to hear about her accident, and certainly we all pray for her quick and speedy and full recovery. So thank you for this invitation to come with you this morning and to reflect. And I had initially set an alarm because I really want to ensure that there's time for dialogue. And I had set an alarm to go off at 10:30 so that I could, I'm going to add just a few more minutes to that and then make certain that I am consciously made aware that I've talked too long, and that we can do that. I'm sorry, let me just edit this for a quick second. I'm sure you'll appreciate it when you hear how long I can go on. So anyway, I set that alarm. Set that alarm. No, I didn't. But let me say that this is, and I'm sorry I'm looking down. I just want to get this done right. Technology is not my friend. All right, there it is, 10:35. And the last thing I want to do is shut off my phone so it doesn't ring. So here we are in this discussion and matter of reflections. And there's so much that I could talk about in terms of living in an unequal world. I was born into an unequal world, as many of you were. And we still are working to try to smooth it out and to ensure that the fruits of equity and inclusion are enjoyed by everyone. We're in a fierce fight now to get those very important principles established. But we are farther along than, say, we were when I was growing up. As I was making notes for this, a lot of thoughts flowed through my mind, this experience, that experience, how to put it all into some kind of context. I've been told that storytelling is really one of my strongest suits, and I do try to bring the lived experience into the work I do. We've been doing this for the last 6 months with the RASE Commission, and I can tell you that our report is now about to be sent to the printer. We're making some last-minute editorial comments. Our commissioners have to take a look at it finally, and then we're going to hopefully have it to the mayor and the county executive within the next 7 to 10 days, and it will then be public and ready for community discussion. We're not the only one. There are so many other groups that are dealing with various aspects of this problem. Some of them have already put their thoughts in writing, made their recommendations. So there's going to be a lot for this community to digest, not merely to look at it, but to really act upon it. We need more a bias towards action in everything that we do. But in preparing for this, a thought came to my mind. I was listening to a church service. I'm a person of faith, and I heard a few weeks ago a minister say that during this time of pandemic, we've had so much time on our hands to really reflect and to think. And he said something that has stuck with me. He says, isolation leads to introspection. Isolation leads to introspection. And if you've been like me, if you're at the stage of life that I am, you look back on various events, you interact with people, you think about things that have happened, people you've met along the way, and you really begin to try to put it into some context. And like I said earlier, I was born in an unequal world, born in the South as a Black person, born into a system of segregation where the lines were carefully drawn, clearly drawn, and strongly enforced. And you did not bear crossing those lines. And from the end of slavery up until, say, the late 1930s and 40s, these lines were respected, but everybody knew that they were unjust. And so we had institutions like the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and other people that went to court. And essentially, for those judges and justices who always talk about their strict constructionists, to really challenge them to apply the meaning that was intent. When the founders said all men are created equal, that people have the right to pursue life, liberty, and justice, and we know that with the minute those words were written, they were a lie because it didn't apply to everybody. All people were not viewed as equal. Only white men who owned property back in the 18th century when those words were written benefited from that. So we've been cracking that nut, trying to open up those doors. And we've had institutions that have been working hard to do that. And then there have been private actions, people who just said, I'm tired of this, I'm going to challenge it. I remember Vernon Jordan telling a story that when he was a young lawyer for the NAACP and working for a registration project down in Georgia back in the early 1960s, long before the Voting Rights Act became law. They were looking for plaintiffs. They were looking for people who would be willing to put their name on a lawsuit challenging the system. And he tells a story about a man he met, an old black man he met in a rural part of Georgia. And the man said, yes, put my name on this suit. I'll be happy to sue it. He said, now, Vernon said, now I need to warn you that there could be danger here. You know, people could come out to hang you and lynch you. And this man said, they are hanging people down here for nothing. They may as well hang me for something. So his point was, I'm going to be a part of this bias towards action. And if it means that I have to give my life, then I'm prepared to do that if it advances the cause of justice. And so I've seen all of this. I've lived through this period. And then my work in life has been to really work on this. I remember exactly the day that Brown versus Board of Education was handed down. I was sitting in a 6th grade classroom in a segregated school in Lynchburg, Virginia. Somebody rushed in and said that the Supreme Court had handed down Brown versus Board of Education. I didn't know what that meant at the time. There essentially was one adult telling that to the teacher. She hadn't been teaching Brown versus Board of Education, but I remember that as one of the events that's clearly stamped in my brain. And yet, even though the Supreme Court ruled in May of 1954 that all segregated schools should come to an end, it was nearly 10 years in my hometown of Lynchburg, Virginia, for a Black child even dared to enroll in a white school in that city. And that story was true all across the South. When the Supreme Court said in a follow-up decision in terms of enforcement in May of 1955, yes, this ruling is law. And they said to the southern states, you must move with all deliberative speed. They didn't say deliberate, which has a unique meaning. They said with all deliberative speed, and the laws and the lawmakers and the governors in those southern states took that to mean take your time, drag your feet, put up as much resistance as you can before you give in. And that's why we see things like the Little Rock Nine. That's why we see people protesting the freedom rides. People said, no, you're trying to slow it down, but we're going to speed it up. Even if it means sacrificing our bodies, giving our lives, we're going to speed it up. You're not going to drag your feet. And eventually, they wore them down. Now, I grew up in an era of separate but equal. I've used this, and I've gone back to my hometown, and I've used this expression, and I began to use it. I used it a few weeks ago when I was having another discussion like this. I said that the South said, we're going to do separate but equal. We're going to create something equal, but we're going to still maintain our separate bounds. Black people and white people and brown people and gay people. No, we're not going to be mingling with you, but we're going to try to give you an equal situation. And they found out they frankly didn't have either the resources or the will to create equal accommodations for all of these groups, okay? So I've used this phrase. The governor of Virginia, the mayor of Lynchburg, the school board of Lynchburg, they worked hard to guarantee the separate. My teachers, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Martin Luther King, all of those groups that came, they worked hard to guarantee the equal. And so finally, equal overwhelmed separate. But it didn't go away. And that's what we've been seeing in the last 60 years. Various iterations, various fights. All right. You would think that we wouldn't have to have a law after we said separate but equal is wrong. We now going to live in a world which is freely, it's both integrated and desegregated. It's two different concepts. One is that the process of coming together, integration occurs. Desegregation means that the barriers to integration are brought down. You've got to fight it on both fronts. And so, but we don't have it. That's why we've seen all kinds of challenges. The Equal Rights Amendment, which barely failed, which essentially said that women needed to be accorded the full rights and benefits of this country. We've seen things like domestic partnership, which was one of the first pieces of legislation I signed when I was mayor in 1994, which is simply gave economic benefits to people, partners, people who were gay, who were partners, who essentially did not have the rights, of marriage that would essentially legalize this relationship, but extended to say, if your partner has this benefit like health insurance, you can get it too, just like any spouse. I signed that legislation. Seems so simple today. You say, oh, my Lord, what are you talking about? That's just guaranteed. But no, it wasn't. And guess what? I signed that in the face of fierce opposition from people who had just helped me get elected a few months earlier. People like Black clergymen who said, oh, this is a sin. This is a sin. Homosexuality is a sin, Mayor. How can you do that? And I said, I treat it like any other civil rights. All right? Because let me tell you, if you change the noun and take gay out and put Black in, people would be acting the same way. They don't want me to have my rights. They don't want them to have theirs. So you have to begin to put yourself in a place where if you are in position to do something to break the system down, then you need to do it. Oh, there's so much I can say to you. I just got all kinds of notes, but I'm looking at the time. I do want to share this experience because I think it is kind of important, and then I would look forward to this being a dialogue. So now I have a consulting practice after I retired from RIT for the last 7 years. I've had a consulting practice, and I've been blessed to have clients. I don't want a lot of clients. I told them, I said, I use this term, it's a boutique consulting firm because I only take the work that I enjoy doing. I don't have to, I don't need it. I don't need the money to survive. So I've engaged in a lot of fun things. I've been to South Korea to work with South Korean communities who wanted to implement the very program we implemented here in Rochester, Neighbors Building Neighborhoods, how to bring people and government together. I work with 5 communities in South Korea on that kind of concept. I've been to other cities. Let me tell you about my last client, and that was in the city of Bloomington, Indiana. They had a skirmish out there dealing with a confrontation with a white nationalist person who was a vendor at the city's public market. And Bloomington, Indiana is a very progressive city, home of Indiana University. It is a very progressive city in a very conservative state. Indiana is one of the most conservative states in the country. And so they had a big skirmish, a big resistance to trying to get this vendor out. And they had demonstrations. The city had to shut the market down. And then I worked with a group out of Ohio State University. They called us in. I went in as the quote mediator, fact finder. And it was around this issue that they had heard something. The mayor was very upset. They'd had meetings and people said, Black people, Latina people, and other indigenous people are not welcome in the city of Bloomington. It shook them to their roots. Why? We're one of the most liberal cities in the country. What are you talking about? And so I went in and spent almost 100 hours talking with people individually. Probably one of the most unique experiences I've had in my life, where I was given the opportunity to sit down one-on-one and listen to people. Just listen. Tell me about your experience here in Bloomington. And they began to paint a picture of exclusion, non-involvement in this progressive city. And it turns out, even though the Black and brown populations are very small, 3%, all right? But there are some Black and brown people in that city who are in highly visible positions at the university, primarily at the university, which has 48,000 students in that city, okay? A city of 86,000. On the faculty, they have one of the highest rates of African-American tenured faculty of any university in the world, all right? As administrators, Blacks and Browns and Latinas, and they're openly welcoming to gays. They have many groups there that deal with various people in the LGBTQ community. I mean, it's phenomenal when you see it. And I can't speak of many cities that I know of that are like that. And yet there is this sense of total invisibility, that they didn't exist except for a few. And these people said to me, one of them said to me, we're fatigued. So what do you mean by that? He said, because every time they come up with a problem dealing with a social issue, they call on us. The same people are being involved over and over and over and over again. And I said, well, he said, and there are other people in this town, they don't call them. Why don't they call on them? Because they don't know that they exist. All right? Invisibility syndrome. And let me tell you that as I've closed down this section, that I think that's what we're dealing with. That's what we've been dealing with. Yeah, I'm here. Richard Wright said, an invisible man. You don't see me. I'm standing right in front of you, and you don't see me. Why? Because they don't think you have a right to exist. We've been dehumanized. I'm sorry for choking over that word, but the dehumanization of people. And I go back to a couple of sentences that were inserted in the Dred Scott decision in 1857. The writer of that decision was Roger Taney. He's Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and a man who owned slaves. And the issue was whether Dred Scott, under the Missouri Compromise, who had gone and left the slave state and moved to a free state, he, by that very action, he attained his freedom. And yet there were efforts to put him back into slavery. Dred Scott had married, he had children, he had a wife, he had an occupation, but all they saw was a Black man. And Roger Taney wrote these words saying Dred Scott had to be returned to slavery. And here are these words, these ugly, hateful, acrimonious words that Roger Taney wrote. A Black man has no rights which a white man is bound to respect. Let me repeat that to you. A Black man has no rights which a white man is bound to respect. That's the creed of the white supremacist movement in the 21st century. They don't respect you because they don't recognize us. And what we've been fighting for all of these years is to say, I'm here. Look at me. I'm here. You got to see me. You got to respect me. I have rights that you got to respect. And what they're saying is they demonstrated on January 6th because they wanted to invade the Capitol, those insurrectionists, to ensure that a white supremacist remain president of the United States of America. Let us be very clear about that. That's all that we're talking about. They wanted to ensure that a man who respected them, gave them respectability, who honored their wishes, who was carrying out their wishes in policy and words. They were climbing up the walls of the Capitol. They stormed those, they were looking for those representatives to prevent them from certifying a race that would remove Donald Trump from office because they needed to keep their white supremacist president. in office. We say no. We're here. You can see us. We're going to use all of the legitimate arms of government to ensure that the rights that were stated in 1776, all people are created equal, will prevail. That's how we end an unequal world. I've got a friend. Her name is Uda Allard. Some of you may know her. She worked in Rochester for a while. She did a lot of anti-racism work. Uda Allard is a white woman born in Germany, immigrated to the United States. I met her. She introduced herself to me and to the audience that we were dealing with. She said, "My name is Uda Allard. I'm the daughter of Nazi parents. And I've spent my entire adult life unlearning what my parents taught me." Unlearning what my parents taught me. I said, "Uda, I've never heard more powerful words, nor have I ever heard a clearer prescription for how we can move forward." Here's my alarm going off. I'm about to wrap up. Never have I heard a clearer prescription. It's a long process. It will not happen overnight. Unlearning things that are wrong, that have been taught to us, that we believe, that are inculcated in our spirits, in the core of our value system, that we have to have the right to recognize that they're wrong, they're not supported by fact, and I got to learn a different way. And then those of us who've learned have an obligation to help our neighbors, our family, and our friends who are down this path. Hey, I'm doing it every day with people in my community, in my family, who say, "I'm not going to take that shot. I'm not going to take that coronavirus shot because it's going to kill me." And you have to gently change. That's just one example of how we go about changing this world, because we need to make it safer. We need to make it safer. We need to make it as virus-free as possible. And we need to make this world as racist-free as possible. One person multiplied millions of times can make a difference. We've been, you as gay people, if I can use that old term, and as people who embrace our friends who are gay, who encourage them, who support them, who say, "I don't see, what are you talking about? I don't see any gay person. I see a person in front of me who I've come to work with, or I've come to love and respect. You told me something." It's just like me telling you that, hey, at night, you know, I go through this thing before I go to bed. And you say, "Oh, that sounds horrible." Hey, I don't see that. We see people. And we need to begin to encourage this. And so the last point I'll make is, here's where we're struggling right now. People now recognize they were denying there's such a thing as white privilege. "Oh, I don't have any privilege. You have a privilege by virtue of being white." You do. I'm sorry. That's just what society has done. And then they recognize that if I give up my privilege, I'm giving up something. Somebody's taking something from me. And this has always been what the civil rights movement has been about. People think you're going to take something from them, and they're going to be less whole than they were before. And that's a discussion we have to begin to have. How to really apportion the benefits of society in an equitable fashion, so that nobody is excluded unless they choose to be. Some people choose to be. They don't say, "I don't want to go to school. I don't want to learn. Count me out on that." Well, okay, you wrote yourself out. Don't come tell me later How come I'm poor? Well, you chose that, but that's a choice. It's not forced on them. We don't say because you're Black, because you're gay, because you're Puerto Rican, because you're Latina, because you are a migrant, you are excluded by law. No, that's the part we break down, and how we apportion these benefits of society in an equitable fashion. So that's my story, and I'm looking forward to it. So thank you again for having me come to you. I hope that what I've said has made some sense, because I know I was dealing with a lot of things I got on paper I haven't said to you, but I think you have a lot of things to add to this conversation as well. So I'm giving this time. I yield the remainder of my time, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, that's terrific. Bill, thank you so much for that inspiring talk from your own experiences, both in the past as well as what you've been up to recently. You know, one of the things that came to mind when you talked about the visibility of, like, we don't even know you're out there, especially in Bloomington. It made me think a bit about something that the Gay Alliance started way back, like in the 1970s, which was called the Speakers Bureau. And what it was it was a group of folks that got together to really sort of learn how to talk about being LGBT, to learn how to sort of be able to not just sort of defend yourself when someone would say attack you, but to actually sort of articulate, what does it mean to be an LGBT person? What is it? What are some of the things that we're dealing with in terms of you know, police harassment, job harassment? You know, a lot of folks still don't know that LGBT people are not protected in many states, that you can still get fired. They think that once the Supreme Court, you know, passed, you know, gay marriage, quote unquote, that everything was fine, and that, you know, it's all across the country. We actually see now some legislation that has just passed the House of Representatives, an Equality Act, because there is a lot of inequality still across the country. And a lot of people just don't know that. A lot of, you know, folks, straight folks, don't know that. And, you know, I've seen, especially as we were moving towards the Supreme Court decision on marriage, there was this, you know, sort of meme or list going around. These are all the benefits that you get from a marriage, legally and sort of socially, and that you don't have as an LGBT person. And in a way, it was sort of like calling out straight privilege for a lot of folks. And they were really surprised. And you're like, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I didn't know that, you know, you couldn't file your taxes jointly. So the fact that you were able to extend the domestic partnership to folks 20 years before the Supreme Court came down with their marriage decision, I think is really, really amazing. And I wasn't sure. I wanted to ask if you were working at that point with that decision with either Tim Maines or Bill Pritchard, who were on City Council at that time.
It was Tim.
Okay.
That legislation. Tim had been a candidate for mayor the previous term. He hadn't made it through the process, but he was still an influential city council person. So he essentially challenged his colleagues. Look, I was mayor for 12 years. It was a total Democratic council. Most of us thought alike. That domestic partnership legislation and one other were the only two pieces of legislation that passed by 5-4 vote in my term.
Oh.
And I didn't have, Kim took the lead on it. It wasn't legislation I proposed. I was sitting there listening to the debate. We had fierce opposition, as you can imagine. Mm-hmm. And it took me back to 20 years earlier when we had that same fierce opposition when the city council refused to, when the United Way refused to take a CETA, a multi-million-dollar CETA grant, because one of the proposals, and it was from the Gay Alliance, and the outpouring of hatred and vitriol that came before city council then, was reminiscent. It wasn't quite as bad, but some of the same players were back 20 years later saying, don't pass this legislation. And here's the one thing I did, people, here's one thing I did. I stood up, because usually the mayor doesn't talk during city council meetings. We make our presentation, we sit down. I said to the president, Madam President, as soon as you send me that legislation, I will sign it. Send it to me quickly, because I know that the opposition is coming. And when my friends in the Black clergy community came to my office in a delegation, said, Mayor, you can't sign that legislation. I said, I already signed it. I already signed it. Why you do that? Because it was the right thing to do. And I said, you are not far removed, all of you from the South. You know what this is. This is a lynch mob who's trying to keep you from having rights. How can I, as a Black man, not sign this legislation? So they didn't like it. They didn't like it. And finally I had to say to them, stop talking about it. It's a done deal. I'm not taking my signature off. It's not going to be repealed. So stop talking about it. Let's talk about something else.
Wow. Bill, could you talk a little bit more about that CETA grants? Because I know that was something that you worked on when you were working and president of the Urban League. So from what I understand, it seems that the United Way sort of didn't touch it. It was like a hot potato. But the Urban League actually said, we'll take care of this. Is that true?
Yeah, because people were threatening to withdraw their contributions from the union. If you take let me tell you, it was about as I recall this, Gerry, and I had to go back and look at my file, it was about a $2 or $3 million grant. It funded all kinds of activities, all kinds of projects. 30,000 of it was going to the Gay Alliance of Rochester for that newsletter, all right? 30,000. So we're talking about 1% of the grant. And they were willing to sacrifice that, all the good that was done. So I talked to so then the mayor Ryan and the city manager approached me at the Urban League. Will the Urban League take this grant? And will you be the administrator of it? I said, yes. I persuaded the board. We started getting calls. We're going to stop giving money to the Urban League. We're going to stop giving the money. And I said, you got to stand up to wrong. So I am blessed that I had a board that had the strength to support us in that venture. We ran that program for years. I don't think we lost $1 in contribution. We probably gained more money from people because of the stand we took than we would have lost because some knucklehead wanted to threaten us by withdrawing money. And so I think that they did that. We didn't have any control over any of our grantees. We executed the grant, but I say we stood strong. We said, we're not going to allow the community to lose this benefit. And we're going to ensure that all of our citizens participate. We had Native American participation, and we had all kinds of groups applying for those grants. And so I don't view it, hey, I never viewed it as a big deal. But I think the people on the other side who were being victims, who were being targeted, they saw it as a big deal that somebody was willing to stand up.
Well, I know our community saw it for a big deal. And Denise just asked, what is CETA? And it was the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act that was signed into law by President Nixon in 1973. And in a way, it was kind of like an extension of like the New Deal. It was federal money that was going to states and to cities and to nonprofit organizations granting money. So,
well, it's almost, Gerry, like what's happening now with the 1.9 trillion pandemic. It is a money poured into communities all across the country to alleviate the effects of a huge recession where job losses were occurred. This was a policy that the government used to try to bring back and restore economic security. So this was the way, and then, rather than just give people a $1,400 grant, which I'm a little skeptical of, because what you're going to do next week when you got bills, or next month when you got bills, it said this will create jobs.
Yes, and Christine's right. It was actually Comprehensive Employment and Training Act. So
yes.
So we do have a question in the chat from Marnie. She says, you mentioned that people who are in a position to do something should. What can people not in those positions do to help if we're more in a position to support?
Oh no, I saw that question when I stopped, and I'm glad you picked it up. because I wanted to address it. Everybody has a voice. And it may not be that, oh, I don't belong to this group, I'm not chairman of this group or something like that. But this is where this movement came from. Listen, let me tell you, when Daniel Prude's situation became public and the streets were filled with people who were absolutely angry, that's a voice. The accumulation of those voices have led us to changes. There's going to be changes. They're coming from every different direction. The Attorney General of the day just issued a huge report on recommendations. The RASE Commission is going to issue a huge report on recommendations. UCLM, Impact. We got all kinds of groups. So you, by adding your voice, you add to the numbers that give clout, and it actually signifies that there's power out there. There is something. This is not just one or two people on a cause. This is a community that is concerned, that's outraged, and we see it visibly. So no, don't think just because you don't have a title, you don't have a power. You do.
Thank you. Thanks for that question, Marty. And yeah.
Mayor Johnson,
Yes.
nice to see you. Give my best to the family. I wanted to say that I too had met Uda, and she helped me unlearn what I had learned through the Black community and church about bias against the LGBTQ community. Because of me meeting her and her sharing her story, I looked at myself and said, okay, so what do I have a bias about? Because we all think that we don't necessarily have any bias. And I learned that I did, and I had to unlearn that. So to that other person who asked the question, every one of us has a voice in that you have the ability to learn something and do better. And by you doing better, everyone else also has the opportunity to do better.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Those are profound words. And that's the experience we have to go through.
Right.
We really have to look at ourselves and saying, why do I take this position? Where did this come from? And you're absolutely right. And I've had to challenge many of my ministerial friends who were just adamantly, vociferously opposed to, we had needle exchange, something like that, needle exchange. Oh, you're giving people needles. You are facilitating drug use. All right. And we had a challenge. Why are you doing this? You can't be silent. And you have to view that every situation is a learning experience. You have this conversation with one person, you get through to that person, they move into that circle. And I've seen this. I've seen Black ministers who were profoundly anti-gay. All of a sudden, now when they saw the AIDS epidemic and how it was devastating the Black community, and listen, I was in a meeting in Albany where this lady, I forget her name, she's this Black lady from New York City. She said, I've lost 2 of my sons to AIDS. We can't lose any more people. She had a profound, I rode down with a minister. I drove to Albany with a minister friend of mine. He said to me, Brother Johnson, I have to tell you, I got to rethink my position on this. And he became really a leading advocate, in the HIV movement. That is the kind of stuff that has to happen. People overlook the power of each of us being able to help. All you got to do is help one other person, 1 or 2 other people, and then spread it out.
Right.
That's you've given a great testimony to the power of the individual.
No, I think you're right. I remember one time I was at Java's coffee shop, and I saw someone I knew, and there was this older white couple there, and they were just chatting me up, and the fellow said, so Gerry, are you married? And I remember in my head thinking, oh, I could say, oh, I'm just not seeing anyone. But it was like this little turning point where I said, well, no, I'm gay and I'm actually not dating anybody right now. But here's somebody I'd never met before, and I was nervous, but I realized that I just had to sort of be who I am for this person. And it was just, I remember thinking, all these years later, that this was like a little step. It was very easy to be around my friends and around my coworkers and everybody. But here's a total stranger who's sort of asking me this pointed question about, really almost about my sexuality in a way. you know, like, and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna tell you the honest truth. I'm a gay guy.
And Gerry, did you feel so better afterwards?
Oh, totally. You know, I'm a member of the book club for the Out Alliance, and we've been reading this book called Queer History in the United States, and we've just reached the Civil War and are going through this. But a lot of what we're learning about is this whole idea of the public and the private, and how a lot of times, you know, laws against LGBT people were not enforced if it was private. But what we're finding now is that, you know, people want to be able to live their lives freely. They want to be able to be who they are. And what that means is that they're living their lives in public. And that's what's really sort of confronting a lot of anti-LGBT bias, is that people are like, well, you know, that's okay, but just don't put it in my face. You know, don't, you know, I don't want to see that, you know, that kind of thing. And it's just fascinating how this has been sort of this thread that's sort of been throughout our history, and we're still you know, fighting it today. So, well, we're getting close to time for our break. I wanted to, if anyone else had a quick question for Mayor Johnson, to put it in the chat. You know, I know it takes a second. There's always a delay with Zoom between you hearing me and and being able to respond. Yeah, I'm not seeing a whole lot more questions, but
what's Denise's point? Denise, did you read Denise's point? She wanted to speak to that.
The strength and pain of being able to be closeted.
That as a Jewish lesbian, I can pass because my skin doesn't tell anything. And Gerry's point that he could have just it's just, you know, it's just a privilege to be able to be secret or closeted.
Can I ask a question now? I want to ask a question, but follow up on based on what Denise said, and I want you to go to break. But I've been in experiences with people very close and dear, and I know they've got something they want to say, but they can't say it. All right. I know what they want to say. I'm gay. They'd say, if I say those words to you, you're going to disappear. You're going to disappear from my life. Mm-hmm. Help me understand how a person like me can break that silence. Is this something I need to leave alone and wait until they can get to that point of comfort? Or is there a way that you can ease that comfort for a person so that they can say, this is who I am. I really need you to know this is who I am. And I know I've had that one experience where I said to the person, I've known that for years.
Yeah. Wow, it's so hard to say because it's sort of a personal journey. You know, a lot of, you know, there's a lot of it's sort of like the process of coming out is this personal journey, and you know, I have it's really tough. It's really tough. I guess just sort of being open and maybe even saying something like, hey, if there's anything you want to share with me, you know, I'm open. Just sort of laying that out there without giving someone the opportunity to be able to say that. I mean, I know some folks who have never come out publicly and have actually passed away. You know, they never came out to their family. They never came out to their coworkers. They were, you know, they, like Denise said, they sort of had this, you know, they quote unquote passed for their whole life. And it's sort of an individual choice, I guess. But to be open and to be friendly and to be non-judgmental and to sort of, you know, through your actions and through your words, I think would be the best policy.
I work with seniors and as a healthcare provider, and I always feel like my trust as a clinician practitioner with them is the most important thing. So I don't necessarily put it forefront who I am. And when a patient tells me something like they have a friend or a son-in-law or something that that they embraced it. It's like the ticket that says, okay, you can come out. Like it's a way of not being direct, but saying, you know, I'm so glad I get to be a part of her partner's life, because otherwise they would have just, you know, I would have never gotten to meet her blah blah blah, you know, her wife.
Yeah. Yeah, the journey continues, but we all have something to learn.
Mhm,
We all have something to learn.
mhm.
And Lev has put some really great words into the chat about this as well, which I think is terrific. All right, we are really close to break. We're going to take a little bit of a break and come back around 11. So leave your Zoom on if you need to use the facility or grab a cup of coffee or get a little snack. Come back. We'll have our panel discussion starting up in just a couple of minutes. But everyone, if you could use your reaction icon, you can give Bill a round of applause with that little clap.
Maybe we could just unmute for a second, Gerry, if everybody just unmutes for 1 second and gives like a big round of applause.
That would totally work too.
Hey.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. And okay, we'll get back together in just a few minutes. See everybody in just a few. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. We come to our second part of the day with our panel. Our moderators for the panel are Dr. Tamar Carroll, who is chair of the Department of History at the Rochester Institute of Technology, and Barbara LeSavoy, professor of Women and Gender Studies, SUNY Brockport. Barbara and Tamar, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Brendan, and thanks everybody for being here. Shout out to my students for attending, and I'm grateful to be part of the Rainbow Dialogue. So I'm thrilled to introduce our panel members today, and I have their bios in front of me, so excuse me if my head turns down as I'm reading from my notes. So I'm going to start off with Angelica Perez Delgado, describes herself as one of the lucky ones from the city's North Clinton neighborhoods. Even though she experienced poverty and trauma, with the support of an aunt and her grandparents, she was able to get her life turned around. Angelica received her BS in Community and Human Services from Empire State College and her MS in Health Administration from Roberts Wesleyan College. Her personal experience of the welfare system and her work as a senior chemical dependency counselor, substance abuse therapist, and quality assurance coordinator for Horizon Health Services, and being chief administrative officer at the Villa of Hope prepared Angelica for her return to her roots and her current position as the president and CEO of the Ibero-American Action League. So Angelica goes on to say that she's been blessed with people in leadership roles who recognized her drive for excellence. She's a highly respected member of the Rochester community and sits on boards of directors for the Eugenio Mario de Hostos Charter School, Center for Government Research, and the University of Rochester Medical Center, and is also active as a community organizer in the northeast part of the city of Rochester. So thanks so much, Angelica, for being part of our panel, and welcome. The next person I'd like to introduce is Bob Day, who was born on December 20th, 1934 in East Bloomfield, New York, lived in East Bloomfield all his life until his recent move to Rochester. Bob's great-great-great-grandfather, Sanders Day, born in 1820, was a runaway slave who journeyed to Rochester on the Underground Railroad from Virginia. Bob's grandmother tells a story about her grandfather, whose family lived on a plantation in Virginia, being sold by the owner of the plantation to a plantation owner in Louisiana to work the fields and harvest the crops. Her grandfather walked all the way back from Louisiana to Virginia to his family. The Virginia plantation owner sent Sanders back to Louisiana. Her grandfather again left the plantation in Louisiana and for a second time walked back to Virginia, where his family was. The Virginia plantation owner told her grandfather he was not going to send him back to Louisiana again because the war was coming and they were all going to be free. Sanders Day and his family then moved their way north to Rochester. So Bob graduated from East Bloomfield High School in 1952, attended the Rochester Entheum and Mechanics Institute located in downtown Rochester, where he studied domestic science, which became RIT's restaurant management program. After doing an internship, Bob was hired by St. John Fisher as chef manager, and then served 3 years in the Army, then returned back to Rochester, where he had a 40-year career at RIT in food services and catering, and he retired in 2000. So Bob's life has been guided by his father's advice to keep him as a young boy, know your place, to never do anything to embarrass his family. As a young boy, Bob recognized he was different, not only because he was African-American, but also because he was gay. The fear of being exposed or drawing undue attention to himself made the closet Bob's home. The fear caused him to be careful to not be observed going down Front Street, Rochester's gay ghetto, in the 50s and 60s. At 86, Bob Day, you might say, has seen it all as an African-American gay man. And thank you so much, Bob, for being part of our panel. And then finally, let me introduce to you Barb Turner. Barb fiercely and tenaciously advocates for civil rights and human rights for all against discrimination and injustice, with a strong voice, especially for her community of color. Currently, Barb is a short-term trainer at Hunter Doyle, a native-born Rochesterian. Her father was one of the first African-American Rochester police officers. Her grandmother, who was a member of the National Negro Business and Professional Women's Club, was one of the first Black legal secretaries at Kodak. Barb began her professional career in 1999 as a facilitator for the youth program at MOCA in collaboration with the then Gay Alliance. Barb became a member of the Alliance's Speaker Bureau and then a safe space trainer. She became an active advocate for LGBTQIA+ people of color while serving on the boards of the Out Alliance, Image Out, and as a founding staff member of the MOCA Center, as the Prevention Programs and Services Manager, and as prevention educator for Hep C and HIV at the Anthony Jordan Health Center. She volunteers on the Rochester Area Task Force on AIDS and is a representative to the National Black Leadership Commission on AIDS. Barb has also served on the City of Rochester Sex Trafficking Task Force and the African American Health Task Force. And Barb enjoys home projects, biking, going to the public market, and a variety of cultural experiences. And I should have said that Angelica is a motorcycle rider. I overlooked that. So that was a big, long, hefty, like important bio on our panel members. And I'm grateful for you being here today. Thank you so much. And welcome. And so I'm going to turn the floor over to Tamara, my colleague, who's going to begin with the first panel question.
Okay, thank you so much for being with us today. This first question is directed at both Barb and Bob. And the question is, how are issues of racial justice and LGBTQ equality similar and different than when you came of age or than when you came out?
Barb, you go first, ladies first.
I was going to yield to I was going to yield to you, but
love you.
Thank you, Bob. The issues are the same as when we came out, or as when I came out. We are still dealing with the racism that is front and foremost and has been, in our communities. So that hasn't changed. What has changed is the expression of one gender and sexuality and the intersectionality that people are experiencing now and being able to be themselves and integrate more into the community. That's what I've seen being a major difference.
Barb, can you just explain that a little bit more? That's really interesting. The expression of gender and sexuality. Could you give an example of that, or what you've observed changing?
When I began at the MOCA Center, when I started with the youth group, at that time, the young adults were beginning to identify themselves rather than allowing us to identify them, which is why we have the whole alphabet now. So people are now identifying themselves. They're not settling for the binary terms. They're not settling for either I'm transgendered or I'm pansexual now. I'm able to identify what I am. Either I'm asexual, I'm either to identify my gender, and I'm able to talk about my sexuality, and they don't necessarily have to intersect nowadays. In the olden days, we always thought of it in terms of sexuality, purely in sexuality. You know, it was LG, then the B, then the T came. But now it's much more open, and the younger people are identifying. Hence, we have the hers, we're identifying the pronouns, hers, them, they. So that's the reason why.
Thanks, Barb.
You're
And
welcome.
Bob, how about for you? How are issues of racial justice, but also LGBTQ rights, how have things changed over the course of your lifetime?
Well, the most I've seen now is that it's out in the open and people are talking about it and discussing it, and minds are changing and things like that. Before, lots of stuff was swept under the rug, as Mr. Barry Johnson was talking about. But even myself personally, I'm still educating on sexuality. And I can remember coming along, the first thing I knew about homosexuality to information.
Oh, we lost you, Bob. Lost your sound. Bob. Hey, Bob, we lost your sound.
Bob?
Hey, Bob, can you hear us? Bob.
Not that anymore. Yes. And, you know, it doesn't matter what stick you're beating with, you know, if you're beating for racism or sexuality. With racism, there were fine lines drawn and you know where you were. But with sexuality, you never knew where you're going to get it, you know, if you put your head out there. You know, they always talk about the raised nail always got banged down the hardest, you know, the first. So I think it goes one and one. But the country is leaning towards understanding. And when I look at government now, and the people that are elected to the elected office and are doing a great job in standing out there, and even in the news media, the homosexuals that are out and open, that gives a chance. I had a friend once that he said he didn't know he was gay. He knew he was different, but the only way he found out he was staying home from school, he was ill one day and watching Oprah Winfrey, and she had a panelist on there and they were talking about it. He says, I identified with it. I know that he had the same feelings I had. And so, you know, people know, and I think the children are learning it more earlier too, the differences that are there and whatnot. So the times they are changing, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah.
And I think I looked at the City magazine the other day and I couldn't help but notice our LGBT community leading the way in that magazine with the protests. So they're out on the front lines and they're talking about the injustice. They're talking about the inequities. So, and they're protesting, they're very active and I'm proud of them.
Great. Let's go forward with the next question, yeah? And this is directed towards Angelica. And of course, anybody else that on the panel that wants to enter in, and respond to the questions, it's open in that regard. But Angelica, turn to you first. how has social change been pushed forward in Rochester? And adding on to that, how have exclusions, for example, of Black, Latinx, Indigenous people hindered achieving progress for social change? And what is the significance of good leadership? Sort of a lot immersed in that.
Yes, I think to highlight some of what Mayor Bill Johnson had mentioned, I think a lot of our social progress and change in Rochester has been built off of the courage and I think and sacrifice of many other leaders, both known and unknown to our community. Coming into Ibero, that is something that I've learned deeply about some of those movements that began in our community very early to even allow us the space today to have this conversation in an open way. You know, as Mayor Bill Johnson was talking, I think, you know, what has been the hindrance. You know, he mentioned the word and I wrote it down about the invisibility, and I often feel gagged. I often feel that we occupy many tables and many spaces, and when we begin to feel courageous and kind of push against the status quo or the systems that have been built, there's this backlash that really comes at you very deeply, that gags you. Another thing that I've noticed, and I've noticed it very deeply during this pandemic, is there's this pacifying, I think, of those courageous voices. So I think we advocate, and there's little bits and pieces of resources that are thrown at you, but I often feel that they're not given to you in the spirit of true freedom, but rather as a means to pacifying the courage in the voices that are in the room. So that's something that I've learned in a very disheartening way as the leader of Ibero in my last 2 years. And I think not settling for that. So I think, you know, good leadership, I think it's really about, first of all, recognizing that this is not your work that you're starting, right? That you have been handed the baton from many other people who sacrificed their careers, who put their personal lives in the line for freedom and equity and equality. And I think recognizing that we all have power and influence, and I love when Mayor Bill Johnson said it, and that it's our moral and ethical responsibility to use that power and influence to continue to create social change. And that's something that I take very, very serious as the leader of Ibero. And I often have to remind people that my loyalty, my commitment is to the community. I'm not interested in any board that I may sit on. At the end of the day, when my passion for creating social change in my community conflicts with any table that I'm in, I feel strongly about taking the courage to say that and say, you know, my loyalty is to my community. And I sit in this table because I carry the water for a very specific group of people, and I will not let anyone silence that. So I think anybody in good leadership, and I want to highlight that sometimes we think about leadership and we think about, you know, CEOs, but what I've learned in the past 2 years as the leader of Ibero is that there is an army of people that go unnoticed, unknown, that are constantly sacrificing for this movement. And what I've learned is that actually my leadership is not about being in the forefront many of the times, but to quarterback and use the power of my institution to make sure that those voices are elevated. So I just want to remind folks that, you know, leadership a lot of times actually goes unnoticed and unknown by many. So building on that, I think, is the best way that you can do that.
Thank you so much. Barb or Bob, do you want to add anything into that question?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Barb, go ahead.
No, I was yielding to you, Bob. Go ahead.
I just want to add to one part of Bill touched on it when he talked about some of the ministers, how they used to attack him for including sexuality and things like that. But there's a big movement in some churches, and I've been a part of that, that all may freely serve and to bring about equality in the church and ordination standards and things like that. So there's some progressive churches that are there, and they're fighting for social justice and race relations and white privilege and all those social issues. So there's some very progressive churches that interpret scripture differently than the others and put a great big bit of effort into healing. And I can remember being in Birmingham, Alabama at the General Assembly of Presbytery USA to advocate for ordination standards for gays and whatnot. It took 30 years to get women the right to have ordination. But to be in that Birmingham, that trip down there, the atmosphere was really something different, because I visited the church where the bombings were and where the 4 little girls were killed in there. But it was all calm and peaceful, and people riding the streetcars together and going into restaurants together. You said, why did we have all that chaos when we could have this calm? So, you know, when we keep pushing and work for justice, it does come around slowly but surely, and what have you like that. So, you know, that comes around, and we can do it through the church and other organizations also.
Thanks, Bob. Barb.
I still think that we have some ways to go with our Black churches. Though that's one of the largest stigmas with our LGBT of color in our LGBT of color community, our Black churches, and the stigma. It's okay to fight for Black Lives Matter, but it's not okay to fight for gay Black lives. So there is that distinction there. So it's still a problem, and I see, as Denise says as well, with the Spanish churches. So, you know, we still have that issue. The younger generation is just putting it out there, whereas in my generation, we kind of operated in our own clusters, and we tried to assimilate as much. You find a lot of older African-American gay people have kids because we tried to assimilate and please the family and do what was, but the generation nowadays are, they're much more confronting the issues.
Thank you for that, Barb. It seems like to me that part of what you're talking about is maybe the politics of respectability, and for oppressed groups to have to try to show that they're deserving of equal rights, and sort of to buy into those institutions like heterosexual nuclear families and feeling all that pressure. So I also hope that there will be further transformation of the churches. So thank you all for your comments. Angie, this question is also for you to start with. Have you mentored others, and what are some good strategies for helping to mentor young queer people coming of age? What words of wisdom would you offer for young people today?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that we focused on at Ibero is having an environment that's really supportive of everyone and everyone. I often struggle because of people of color, right? And we're experiencing our own oppression and our own exclusion to run organizations that almost replicate that. So I've personally been very intentional in my leadership to ensure that our organization is supportive, especially in the Latino community, because that sends a big message to the rest of the community. I had a very personal experience. So Ibero participated for the first time ever in the Pride Parade when I became CEO in 2019. And as I recall going into the parade, and, you know, we're holding the Puerto Rican flags, and, you know, we had an army of people that came from the Ibero team. And I remember going around a corner and having some young people say, oh my goodness, Ibero is there. And the pride in which they waved the Puerto Rican rainbow flag. And I remember at that moment, just feeling so emotionally overwhelmed, right? That such a simple gesture meant inclusion for a group of people. And, you know, if we can do anything, is ensure that the leadership is representative of the community that we serve. I have, you know, some folks that are leading some amazing LGBTQ plus work in my organization. I want them to be in the forefront. I was having a chat with one of my staff members as I was preparing for this. And I said to him, I said, you have to document the history of Ibero because we're changing the culture in Ibero. This is the inclusion of this LGBTQ community, running programs in school that are specifically talking to kids about this, doing advocacy in the community is something that it's new for Ibero. And it's a big deal. We're writing history. So I think from my perspective, that's the best mentorship that I can give is the space for people to be themselves and advocate just as loudly and strongly as Ibero does for everything else. This is part of our fight, and we can't leave this important issue out. We have to represent, especially considering what happens in our island. We know that there's a real tension in the Latino culture, in the transgender community. There's been some horrific events that have occurred in our island. So I don't take that responsibility lightly, that I run the largest dual language organization in upstate New York. And it is my, once again, moral and ethical responsibility to signal my community that this organization will be fully inclusive. And I understand that many may not agree with that, but that's okay. That's the risk and the courage that I will need to have at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Angie. Barb or Bob, do you want to add anything to mentoring, how you approach mentoring young people, or what words of wisdom you have for youth today?
Well, I just want to give a shout out for GLSEN and some of those groups that organize in schools to give comfort to that comfort in expression to the students that will come into the safe zones and share their experiences and say, I'm okay, and there's strength in community. And I think that's good when the schools will allow to have those groups, the GLSENs and some of those people come in.
For me, I think we always have to remember to have young people at the table, to involve them in the planning. It's my responsibility to pass on to the next generation and to teach them and lead them. But I also have to put them in those roles of leadership and take that responsibility and step back and guide them. Very often we practice adultism because we've been in this role for so long and we've done it for so long and we think we know the best, but we have to truly train them. I didn't expect to be a mentor when I began mentoring or when I began working with the youth at the Out Alliance in the late 90s, but I continued just to give them encouragement. Back in those days, we were really fighting education with the kids because our school system, the Rochester City School District graduation rate was so low, and really encouraging them to stay in school despite all the obstacles in their way and go on to higher education. I'm proud to say so many of them have, and they are, and they're coming back and taking those leadership positions. So just still being there for them, asking them how they're doing. When a person reaches out to you, just being there to answer the questions on Facebook, because they really don't have a lot of LGBT of color role models, which is how I ended up getting into this role myself. I came out on the stage of the Raise a Hope conference, and at the time, the Out Alliance was looking for an out lesbian to help facilitate these groups, and they just could not find any, which is again why I find myself, like the mayor said, in so many other roles on boards, just as a lack of. So it's my responsibility to mentor and to get other young people to be in those roles and positions.
Great. Thanks so much. It's interesting as I'm listening to you all speak that so much of your leadership story is about lifting others up, right? Providing space and voice, which is so significant, right? And I'm inspired by that. It's something that I always think about myself in my own role. So the last question before we open this up to a Q&A, which we hope to have a dialogue with our audience members, is that the Shoulders to Stand On archives were the inspiration for the Anthony Mascioli Rainbow Dialogues program and our partnership with the Rochester Public Library. Given your own stories and narratives, what is the significance of preserving LGBTQ IA+ history and the history of communities of color here in Rochester? And I have in my note, Barb and Bob, that I'll start with you, and then Angie, if you want to add in following their responses. So Barb, why don't you go first?
For so long, we've been invisible. Again, my being here is a product of them being unable to find other LGBT or other lesbian, Black lesbians. So for so long, we've been invisible. When I came out, I never thought that there were an older generation of Black gay people who had done this before me or been around. It wasn't until I heard Bob's story one time, Bob, and I had to remind Bob of this. He did a workshop 20 years ago where him and his cousin talked about what life was like then for them, that it dawned on me. And we do need to preserve that history because, again, it's often not done for people of color. A lot of our stories have been lost and are being lost. And so we do definitely need to preserve that.
Thanks. Bob.
Yeah, I was just thinking, the color line, we used to call that between the white and the Black and stuff like that. And that followed right through the gay community too for quite a thing. And there were some, in the gay community, even there's some derogatory remarks, like if somebody that was Black, oh, you're dealing in charcoal, you could hear those little things. Or if they happen to be Asian or something, oh, the rights, you like the rights, don't you? So, those things existed back then. And I'm talking back in the 50s and 60s and stuff like that. But I still think there's that little division. There used to be so much talk when I was with the Alliance on the board about reach out. They were always trying to reach out to other groups. And I think it has succeeded to a point, even when I go to a SAGE group and stuff like that, there's some transgender people there and whatnot. And it makes such a big, rich community. And the stuff that they're collecting, the stories and putting in the archives and things like that, that needs to be preserved. But there's a lot of work to be done to break it down more and more. I'm glad that children are identifying earlier or even questioning and exploring and trying to find out just where they fit into where it is. And some of us would never had that freedom. We just had a feeling and sort of covered it up and try to hide and whatnot and keep it a secret. So life is open now and people can live it more fully and generously. And I like that. But yeah, there's a struggle getting here and what have you. Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, the struggle is real.
And Angie, do you want to say anything about the significance? You alluded to this about the importance of documenting the changes that are happening right now at Ibero. And my understanding is that Ibero has transferred some archival documents to the Rochester Public Library through the Rainbow Dialogues program. So could you tell us a little bit more about why you think it's so important to make sure that history is preserved?
Yeah, I think what's happening today, you know, we're trying to understand our histories. No one is going to accurately recount our history in the way that we can. So, you know, I think taking charge of our own stories, making sure that our stories are told in the way that we want them to be told, that the highlights are the things that we want highlighted. Because I think we spend, you know, as oppressed as we have been, we've also won many, many, many huge wars and battles. And I think it really helps the youth understand what has been done before, you know, what shoulders are you standing on? Sometimes we undervalue the moment because we don't know the sacrifices that were made for you to be here right now having the conversation that you have. So one of the things that I've appreciated in Ibero is all of the history. So we actually did some asset mapping. I put a group of folks together when I first came on, and we wanted to keep track, like who has everything that belongs to the Latinx story in this community. We're in the middle now of a Rochester Community Area Foundation. We're doing oral interviews because another thing that I noticed was that a lot of our elders were starting to pass away and that history had not been documented accordingly. So we're doing some oral interviews now. We call it pioneers, the pioneros. I've asked some of my staff to even begin, like I mentioned, to document the timeline of when Ibero really began to be inclusive of the LGBTQ community, because when we're in it in the moment, we don't realize that we're making history, but we are. These things really, really matter. And in 2020, I convened a group of people to write what we're calling the Greater Rochester Latino Agenda. And one of the things that we did was call upon leaders in the community that were LGBTQ. And we said, we need you to write your section, right? Because your advocacy issues are Ibero's advocacy issues, and we don't want that to be excluded. And, you know, I'll say once again, I think it sends a very strong message that, you know, we are going to be inclusive. I think I love that when somebody said about unlearning, there's a lot that the Latinx community has to unlearn and learn to really be an exclusive. And I deal with this with my own children, with my own family. We've talked about the faith community. We talked about our elders. And if that's the contribution that we can make, but let's document it so that other people can pick up the work where we left off and not have to redo things or make the same mistakes that were made in the past.
Sure.
I think there's a question in the chat that's maybe related to this last question about archives and the significance of memory and preserving memories. So the question comes from Tom, and it says, as survivors of the early AIDS epidemic, can you briefly describe how isolation and ghettoization of gay people perpetuated death and dying, and how AIDS activism brought many of us out of the closet and into the light? And Tom suggests that he could draw a parallel to what's happening today with people coming out of the Black Lives Matter closet.
The problem is that when you look at the numbers of, I just being a HIV and AIDS activist, the numbers of HIV positive African-American gay and bisexual men are enormous. We have not yet solved this problem, and we don't address it and we don't talk about it. You know, we're talking about a pandemic, but we've had an epidemic here for quite a while. And so I'm just so stuck on that we're still in it. We just have better medications to deal with it. but we don't talk about it enough in the African American community. People who are affected in the African American community don't speak out. So we don't do a lot of education about it. When I was at Anthony Jordan, we did start a campaign to reach out to the elders in the community so that to educate them on how to talk to their nieces, kids, grandkids, and so on. But that's just my spill with the HIV.
That was something that came up in the Latino agenda about, the multiple marginalized identities, right? So LGBTQ communities of color, they already bring health disparities. And then this gets even largely compounded, right, by this conflicting identities. And, that was something that I know was really highlighted by the group of Latinx leaders that came together, was how do we bridge that gap? Because the health community already has a hard time engaging communities of color, right? They already have a difficult time delivering care that's really engaging, and that just gets multiplied and compounded even further when there is this other component brought in. So that was something that really came up with, the lower cost for the newer medications that are coming out, the education, the counseling, and how do we truly make that accessible to this segment of the communities of color.
And the younger population is very sensitive now to stigma. And not only distrusting of the medical profession, but very, very sensitive to stigma. So, you really have to be cognizant of that.
Yeah. Are there other questions, Tamar, that you see in the chat?
There's an assimilation question.
Yeah, I think the assimilation question is really interesting. It comes from, just let me get my cursor up there. It comes from Denise. And Denise wrote, there's also the quote, assimilation that makes younger people ask, what's the separation of gay for, i.e. gay bars? Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think with the younger people not identifying as much as being gay, with the whole queer movement, just being queer and having it being open and non-binary, and not wanting to identify. I remember when I started working at MoCA as the manager of the MoCA Center in the 2000 whatever, we had a hard time finding gay men of a certain age. And then we found out that they were going to regular Black bars. And so it was interesting, the shift that they were identifying not as much as being gay as they were identifying more with being African-American and needing and finding more comfort in that community. Whereas when I was younger, I found more comfort in the gay community and more acceptance in the gay community. And now they're going back to their natural communities.
Sure. I always worry a little bit about assimilation being absorbing, right? And to the extent of ways that we would define bars and restaurants as all bars and restaurants being straight, right? And so, yeah, that resonated with me in ways that, sort of raises a bit of a red flag. Bob or Angie, any comment there? No.
Well, I just want to put in a personal observation because I haven't been in a bar in 41 years, but all I can remember is what the bar scene was like when I was around. And that used to be one of the meeting places where you could go and truly be yourself, because you didn't have to worry if everyone was gay or in there and things like that. And I don't want to knock the bar owners or anything else, because they were great support to the gay community financially and things like that, with the gay picnic and supplying things to bring the community together. But also for people that, like myself, that overindulged and sort of have what I want to call it, an addiction, you know, and it breeds a lot of that stuff. And then too, it also affects the sexual practices. If you're getting high or drunk, you sort of lose your defenses and say, I don't care, and things like that. And then some people are on the down low, you know, pretending and get two types of lives going on, one on the straight life and putting on a face for that. And I don't want to put that all on the bars, neither, but it was. So I don't know what the bar scene is like these days now. I imagine there's still community stand or meeting places and things like that, but there's also entrance or gateway into addictions and other practices that perhaps aren't all that beneficial. That's just my observation.
And there's also social media now, which is a whole other avenue for meeting people.
Yeah, Denise added in response, even as a professional, identification as homosexual is no longer categorized like it is politically incorrect to separate.
So it sounds like you're talking about some of the benefits of having separate spaces for organizing and affirming identity. But Bob, you're also emphasizing that sometimes those, because of those spaces' connection with alcohol or drugs, at times they could be harmful, or just also, you know, sometimes it's powerful to be able to form coalitions with other people too, right? And to bring broader groups together. So I'm interested in Barb's point about how young queer people are leading the Black Lives Matter movement here in Rochester. And I wonder if they might give us a model for, you know, coalition building and bringing social justice issues together, and maybe even for breaking some of the silence around HIV/AIDS. Do they make you, Barb, you said you're very proud of them. Do they make you feel hopeful for the future, or?
I definitely feel very hopeful for the future. I mean, just the direction of things, the way things are going. We're talking about health disparities. We're talking about systemic racism. We're talking about all these issues that have led us to this point right now. So we can identify these things, yes. So yes, I'm very, very hopeful for the future.
Angie or Bob, do you want to, you know, conclude with any hopes for the future that you have? Anything that you see right now that makes you feel hopeful?
Oh, I'm very hopeful. You know, when you can span from the 50s all the way up to 2001, you've seen many changes. And I reflect back on the days when I was very active and out there in the marches on Washington and going down there and seeing the AIDS quilts spread out on the mall, and a mock wedding. Some of them, they were singing, you know, going to the chapel, and all these gay people that were in couples or in unions and doing this. And now all of a sudden there's a reality that there is marriage equality as written in the books and things like that. And the AIDS epidemic is more researched to know what's going on. And if people take responsibility for their lives, it could be a lot better, you know? And so to see that, and then how the young people are identifying earlier and the support that's there, and more role models, because people come out and then they're a role model that they can say, oh, they can do that and they have this sexuality. So it's all evolving, and I just see a bigger future as we go along. But we have to fight ignorance. You know, that's one thing that we have to fight, and education, and have a willingness to change, you know, and whatnot. So I see that all as a positive thing. There's still stuff on the road ahead that we have to do, but I think it's going to come around and be like that. So I have great faith in the future. So that's just what I want to add to my observation as what it was. You know, I often think there's a movie, The King and I, and they used to sing a song with Kiss in the Shadow. And that's where we were as gay people, kissing in the shadows and stuff like that. And now we can go and hold hands and walk down the street. And if we want to kiss somebody, we can kiss somebody too, you know? So it's not so much in the shadow anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I am hopeful too. I think, before every great change, there's this conflict.
Mhm.
I just feel that the conflict that we have now will just create, I think, something more beautiful. It's not going to be a pretty road. We really do need to stay committed and not let anyone wear us down. But I have to tell you that when I see young people take such control of their narratives, their lives, who they want to be, to me is inspiring. As a Generation Xer, I always say Xers, we were very kind of agreeable, right? We were birthed by the leaders of the social justice movement, and we had these conflicting identities, right? But we were very respectful of tradition. And I look at people now and I'm like, man, I want to be 20 something right now so that I can, so I'm hopeful too. And it will be a painful transformation, but it will be a transformation. And I just hope to live to be able to see the other side and say, this is what was created through that painful moment, through the Daniel Prudes, through the everything that we've experienced in the last decade. So I am also hopeful with you, Bob.
Great.
Could I this has been so informative for me to sit through this. I was told I could leave after my presentation. I said, no, I wanted to sit, and I've just been so overwhelmed with hearing this perspective. And I wish that thousands and thousands of more people in this community could sit and just listen to you all talk. But let me add a quick cautionary tale. I'm optimistic too. I mean, I gotta be, otherwise I couldn't wake up in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not, but we can't forget something. 73 million people voted for Donald Trump, a racist. They voted for Donald Trump. And there are people trying to rationalize that. They're trying to rationalize that. And I use this example all the time. If my daughter was married to a financial person who helped me increase my wealth several times over by his advice, and my daughter said to me, but Dad, he beats the crap out of me every day. He abuses your grandchildren. Am I going to still say I'm going to still like this guy because he helps increase my bottom line? 73 million people voted for Donald Trump, and that was just 3 months ago. We got a problem here, and what I think I'm hearing from all of you, Bob, Angelica, Barbara. I mean, I'm just so impressed. Angelica, it's the second time I've been on a panel with you, and I don't get your phone number and call you because you're so impressive. But so Barbara, and so is Bob, who I've known for years. We got to keep this fight going. All right, we have to fight these people. We cannot excuse it. We cannot allow it to happen. We can't let people forget. All right, and we got to challenge them. Because I say to them, but you know what? Here's the real sad part about it. My next door neighbor he could have voted for Trump. They don't put up yard signs anymore. They don't put bumper stickers on their car. And I know too many people who say Donald Trump says what I think and feel. That's what we face today. But listen, I've just been so impressed listening to your journey. And I think people need to understand it. Because my last point is, it's one thing to be Black in America and face discrimination, but to face discrimination from your own group. You can't go to church because you're sitting there and the pastor's saying that heaven is only reserved for certain people. All right. And if you're not this way, you can't get in heaven. All right. You can't shake my hand. You can't even associate. That's the world I don't want to take your time, but I just want you to say, you have inspired me, but we cannot stop for a moment because there's a huge fight out there that we've got to still mount. Thank you for letting me in your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wonder, I just want to say that thank you so much, Mayor Johnson, for those words. And we're at our time limit. I think people could linger and ask questions, but I would ask that everybody unmute and give our panelists a big round of applause. Just phenomenal.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bravo. Thank you so much. I mean, it's such an honor and privilege to hear your words and your experiences. So I don't know if you could linger a little longer. There's some questions coming up in the chat. Let's see.
There's a question. This event will be made available in the future to be watched. The Rochester Public Library.
Great.
It's not immediately available.
All right.
Yeah.
And I think
someone wrote, this panel has been truly remarkable and inspiring, so much experience. And so that's just like, we could probably save the chat, right, Tamara?
Yeah, we can save the chat. I think that Christine wants to give people a survey as well. Christine, do you want to put that in the chat? The instructions for taking a survey?
I can put that in the chat, and we will also be sending it out to anyone who pre-registered for the event. So I will put it in the chat now, but also look for an email if you miss it in the chat.
Yeah, and Christina, is someone else coming in to say closing words, or I'm sorry, I forgot about that.
No, that's okay. That would be me. And actually, it's hard to follow Mayor Johnson because he summed everything up so well and gave us that reality check. So I just want to thank everyone who has participated today. Our panelists, Mayor Johnson, you've been very inspirational today. And, thank you for sharing your wisdom and your life stories and expertise. As the historian for the city and the person responsible for all of the library's historical collections, I work with youth all the time. And for me, I really believe that it's hard to know who we are and to figure out where we want to go if we don't know where we've come from. And that's why, for me, it's always so important that we do preserve this history and share this history. And I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing to make that possible. So please continue that work. As many of you know, the reason the Rochester Public Library is involved in the Rainbow Dialogues is because we are the official repository for collections of the LGBT community coming out of the Out Alliance. So we are working hard every day with Evelyn, Bailey, and others out the Out Alliance to make sure collections are preserved and that we make those accessible so that people can continue to learn from them in the future. So thank you all very much. I also need to thank, of course, the Out Alliance, my colleagues at the Rochester Public Library, and also the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library for their support to make this program and the preservation of these archives possible. And also, I don't want to forget to thank everyone who brought this program to you today. We have a very dedicated committee of people who work year-round to plan the annual Rainbow Dialogues. And that is our dear, dear friend, Evelyn Bailey, who was recently injured and could not be with us today. But Evelyn, you're in our prayers. Also, Tamar Carroll, Barb LeSavoy, Gerry Szymanski, Tim Judd, Jimmy Polino, and my colleague at the Rochester Public Library, Brandon Fess. Thank you for all of the work that you've done to make this possible today. And with that, I will close the formal portion of the session, but as we've indicated, we can leave this open if people have other questions that they'd like to address.
And Chris, can I just put in a plug for next year's Rainbow Dialogues?
Yeah, please.
That they'll be held in conjunction with an exhibition of AIDS posters at the Rochester Memorial Art Gallery And so Barb and others, you know, Tom asked about the AIDS epidemic. I hope it'll be a chance next year to focus on what we can learn from our community's history of addressing HIV/AIDS and putting it in national and global context as well, with a really rich, there's over 8,000 posters in special collections at the University of Rochester. And so a portion of those will be exhibited, and we'll have talks and the Rainbow Dialogues so that you get a chance to see those posters and talk about the history and its legacy, and, you know, and the reality today too, because as Barb pointed out, this epidemic is not over. So mark your calendars for next year. Remember to come back, and thank you all for being with us today.
I'd just like to put a
Thank
shout out
you.
for Bruce Woolley, who's also part of our committee.
Yes, Bruce.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Bruce.
I was like,
Yeah.
oh no, Bruce.
And Jimmy Polino, right?
yeah,
Did we
yeah.
mention Jimmy?
Yep, I did
Yeah.
mention Jimmy. Yes.
Great.
Bravo.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.